A powerful patriarch, his broken prodigy son, and an employee who only plays for herself. One night, he makes a bold promise: play the piano and marry my son. But music unlocks doors that money can't buy and exposes secrets no one can control. What would you do if a melody could save a life and change your own? A decision, a desperate pact, and a stage where love refuses to follow a script. Before listening to this beautiful story, subscribe to our channel and receive heartwarming stories every day. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the Sterling Grand Hotel, painting golden rectangles across the marble floor of the lobby. William Sterling stopped before the display case showcasing old family photographs, searching in the faded image of his wife for something that could calm him. She held baby Ethan in her arms, smiling with that serenity he had never been able to find anywhere else. 5 years since the accident. 5 years of silence that stretched beyond her absence, now reaching the son who was once only music. William touched the glass with his fingertips, feeling the cold surface against his skin. The hotel operated as always, receptionists greeting executive guests, waiters traversing the grand lobby with coffee trays, corporate events filling the ballrooms with voices that meant nothing to him. Everything was efficient, lucrative, empty. What truly mattered was broken somewhere inside the son he no longer knew how to reach. Ethan was 23 years old and had a pianist's trajectory that critics called promising until the day everything collapsed. It was at the Symphony Center in Chicago, before an audience expecting virtuosity but finding paralysis. Ethan's hands trembled over the keys in the second movement of the concerto. Cold sweat trickled down his neck, his breath hitched. He managed to finish the piece by muscular instinct, but something fundamental shattered that night. Since then, the piano was synonymous with fear. Brooke entered Ethan's life when he most needed someone who saw him as more than a wasted talent. She was beautiful, disciplined, daughter of Victoria Caldwell, owner of a cultural agency that managed important names in the American classical music scene. Brooke was not malicious, but she had clear objectives, and Ethan represented an opportunity to solidify the agency in a competitive market. The engagement happened 6 months after the collapse, at a discreet party at the hotel, with few witnesses and many silences. Victoria Caldwell came to the Sterling Grand Hotel weekly, dressed in dark suits, a leather briefcase in hand. She spoke of contracts, international tours, image licensing, and comeback strategies. To her, Ethan was an asset in recovery, needing to rejoin the market before losing relevance. To William, her every word felt like a sharp blade against his son's fragile well-being. He read each clause with a lawyer's scrutiny, always seeing the same truth. Ethan would cease to own himself, becoming property of a board dictating when, where, and how he played. William knew he needed time. Ethan needed time. But Brooke and Victoria Caldwell spoke of deadlines, of closing windows of opportunity, of sponsors awaiting a mere sign that the pianist was ready to return. The pressure was constant, polite, yet poisoned with good intentions. And William, alone in managing the hotel and raising a shattered son, no longer knew how to protect him without completely isolating him from the world. Into this tense scenario, Cassidy Miller entered the story. Unaware her presence would change everything. Cassie was 26, with hands marked by honest labor, fingers fine yet strong, with short, clean nails. She had worked at the Sterling Grand Hotel for 2 years, starting as a cleaner and rising to lead attendant for the main ballroom on maintenance mornings. The ballroom was immense, with crystal chandeliers she cleaned twice monthly, round tables with white linens, and at the far end, on a small wooden stage, a Steinway grand piano belonging to William's grandmother. The piano always remained closed. Covered by a green velvet cloth, Cassie removed only to wipe its keys. She did this with care, as if tending something sacred, which it was. Cassie knew how to play. She had learned at Bridgeport Arts and Music Center, BAMP, in Chicago's Bridgeport neighborhood, where she grew up sharing a two-bedroom apartment with her parents and two siblings. The lessons were free, funded by a nonprofit that believed in music as a tool for social transformation. Cassie believed too, at least until her father suffered a stroke, forcing her to leave the conservatory to work. She played in secret. 2 songs, Nevermore, always timed between the event manager's departure and the kitchen staff's arrival. They were simple folk melodies she had learned by ear, tunes her mother hummed while doing laundry, rhythms from deep within her memory, translating naturally through her fingers. Playing was the only thing that made her feel she hadn't entirely lost herself to responsibility and weariness. The younger brother, Leo, was 19 and dreamed of studying computer engineering at the Illinois Institute of Technology. He was brilliant, the kind of kid who fixed neighbors' computers for spare change and spent his nights devouring programming tutorials on foreign websites. While public university tuition was free, the real challenge lay in the cost of books, transportation, food, and the hours he would need to dedicate to studies instead of work. Cassie hoarded every spare penny from tips that didn't officially exist to build the fund that would secure Leo's first year of college. It was a simple, brutal math. She would work herself to exhaustion so he might have a chance to be more. The Sterling Grand Hotel paid reasonably well by industry standards, but Cassie's true reason for staying went deeper. The place offered silence. In the empty morning corridors, amidst chandeliers and mirrors, she could breathe without anyone needing her. And there was the piano. That piano no one else played, sitting there like expensive, useless furniture, was hers for 10 secret minutes each day. Until, on a gray July late afternoon, with rain pattering against the grand ballroom's panoramic windows, Ethan walked in unannounced and found her playing. Cassie felt his presence before seeing him, a subtle shift in the air, and paused mid-musical phrase. She turned slowly, expecting a reprimand, dismissal, humiliation, but Ethan said nothing. He stood by the door, shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the piano as if seeing a ghost. Then something strange happened. Cassie, instead of rising and apologizing, resumed playing. It wasn't a rational decision. It was instinct. She picked up the jazz standard exactly where she'd left off, maintaining the same tempo, the same lightness, without looking at him. Ethan, who hadn't been able to be near a piano for months without his chest tightening, stayed. He stayed and breathed. He took a deep breath for the first time in a very long while. William stumbled upon it by chance. He was descending the stairs connecting the administrative office to the event hall when he heard the music. It was a discreet sound, almost timid, but unmistakable. Piano. Someone was playing the Steinway. He quickened his pace, prepared to scold some disrespectful employee, but paused upon spotting the scene through the glass doors. Ethan was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall beside the stage. His eyes closed. His hands rested on his knees, loose, without the chronic tension William had learned to recognize over the past months. At the piano, a young woman played with serene concentration, fingers dancing over the keys with the naturalness of someone doing it for pleasure, not obligation. William recognized Cassie immediately. She was the employee who always greeted him with a discreet nod, who never arrived late, who did her work without complaint. He watched long enough to understand what was happening. It wasn't about the music itself, though she played well. It was about the rhythm, about the simplicity, about the fact that Ethan, for the first time since his collapse, was near a piano without panicking. William felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of relief and despair, and he slowly retreated so as not to interrupt. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lying in the bed of the penthouse apartment he occupied at the Sterling Grand, William thought of all the therapies, all the doctors, all the useless conversations with psychologists who said the same thing. He needs time. But time for what? So Brooke and Victoria Caldwell could convince Ethan to sign contracts that would turn him into a product? So fear could crystallize into permanent paralysis? Or so, somehow, his son could find his way back to music on his own terms? The answer came from an unexpected place. William remembered something his wife used to say, in the last months of her life, when the illness already left her confused, but still lucid in flashes. She held young Ethan's hand and said, "Music isn't about showing off, it's about sharing." It was a simple, almost banal phrase, but it carried a truth William had forgotten amidst international conferences and corporate events. Music wasn't performance, it was connection. The next day, William summoned Cassie to his office. She climbed the stairs, her heart beating fast, certain she was about to be fired. The office was Spartan, with a dark wood desk, leather chairs, a wide window overlooking the Chicago skyline. William stood with his back to her, gazing at the city. "Please, have a seat," he said without turning around. Cassie obeyed, her sweaty hands clutching the hem of her apron. "I saw you play yesterday," William continued, and she swallowed hard. "And I saw my son manage to be near the piano without having a panic attack." He then turned, and Cassie saw his eyes were red, tired. "I need your help." Cassie didn't immediately understand. William explained slowly, choosing each word carefully. He needed to prove, to himself and to Brooke and Victoria Caldwell, that Ethan could still perform, but under conditions that respected the young man's time and emotional state. He needed an event, a small, intimate concert, where Ethan could play without the pressure of critics, sponsors, agents. And he needed someone to be at the piano with him, someone Ethan wouldn't associate with expectations or failures. "I'm offering a bonus," William said. $30,000. It's enough to cover your brother's first year at IIT. Cassie stood still. It was more money than she could save in 2 years of work. "But there's a condition." The condition was simple, yet at the same time, impossible. Cassie would have to play the piano at the charity concert William would organize within a month. She would play a few simple pieces to warm up the room and, somehow, create the conditions for Ethan to feel secure enough to take over the piano and finish the performance. There would be no tricks, no pressure, just shared music. "What if he can't?" Cassie asked, her voice weak. "What if the block doesn't yield?" "Then I will have at least tried," William responded. "And you will have earned the bonus regardless. I'm not asking for miraculous results. I'm asking for presence. Your presence by his side, doing what you do best, playing without expecting anything in return." Cassie thought of her brother. She thought of the nights Leo stayed awake, studying alone in their tiny room by the light of his cell phone, because they didn't have money for a decent study desk. She thought of her mother doing laundry for others until her hands were raw. She thought of how many times she had given up her own dreams to ensure they had food on the table. $30,000 wasn't just money. It was the difference between Leo becoming just another young person without prospects and Leo having a real chance at IIT. "I accept," she said, and something shifted in the room's air. William extended his hand, and Cassie shook it. The grip was firm on both sides, an agreement sealed not by contract, but by mutual need and shared desperation. The days that followed were strange and intense. William informed the hotel staff that a charity event would be held in the main ballroom, something small, for selected guests, benefiting a local charity. The news spread quickly. Brooke and Victoria Caldwell appeared at the hotel 2 days later, demanding details. William received the two in his office with the same tense calm he used to negotiate with difficult suppliers. "A concert?" Victoria asked, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Ethan hasn't played in public for almost a year. Are you risking his mental health for what? To prove a point?" "To prove he still can," William corrected. "On his terms, not yours." Brooke leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. She was beautiful in a sharp way. Smooth, dark hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, subtle makeup enhancing her brown eyes. "And who will play with him? Did you hire an accompanying pianist? Because if so, we need to approve it. Anything involving Ethan's image needs to go through the agency first." "I didn't hire anyone," William said. "I have an employee who plays well enough for what we need." The silence that followed was thick. Victoria and Brooke exchanged glances, and then Victoria let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're joking? An employee? From the hotel?" "William, this is amateurish. This is embarrassing. If Ethan is to play again, it must be with professionals, in a controlled environment, with press, with streaming, with—" "None of that," William interrupted. "The event will be private. No broadcast, no critics, just a small group of people who truly care." Brooke rose, her eyes flashing. "You are sabotaging his career. You are throwing away months of work we've put into keeping Ethan's name relevant in the market." "I am saving my son," William said, and there was steel in his voice. "And if you two genuinely cared for him, instead of the bank account he represents, you would understand this." Brooke left, slamming the door. Victoria lingered a moment longer, looking at William with something akin to pity. "You will regret this," she said softly. "When this amateur experiment blows up in Ethan's face and he never wants to see a piano again, you will realize you were wrong." But William did not regret it. For that afternoon, descending to the grand ballroom, he saw Ethan and Cassie sitting side by side on the piano bench, she playing a simple melody and he observing her hands with a student's focused attention. It wasn't a cure, but it was a beginning. The preparations for the concert unfolded in the mornings, always in the mornings, when the hotel had not yet fully awakened, and the ballroom was solely theirs. Cassie would arrive half an hour early, her hair still damp from a hurried shower, finding Ethan already waiting. He rarely spoke much, but there was a presence to him that hadn't existed before, a concentrated attention that vaguely resembled the pianist he once was. Cassie always played the same pieces, traditional folk melodies she knew by heart, popular tunes she had learned in childhood, rhythms that stemmed from somewhere prior to formal technique. There was no sheet music, no metronome, no pressure. It was organic, living, imperfect music. And Ethan, gradually, began to follow along. First just listening, then tapping the rhythm with his fingers on his thigh, then playing a note here and there, testing, experimenting, returning. "Where did you learn?" Ethan asked one day, breaking the silence that had become their unspoken rule. Cassie glanced at him sideways, surprised by the question. "At the Bridgeport Arts and Music Center," she replied, "before I had to start working." "Why did you stop?" "My father got sick. Someone had to pay the bills." Ethan was silent for a moment, processing. Then he said, softly, "I'm sorry." "You don't need to be," Cassie replied, returning to play. "It was what had to be done. But this here," she gestured vaguely toward the piano, "these minutes every day before work, they are mine. No one can take them away." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never thought of the piano as something that belonged to him in that way, as a private space of freedom. It had always been about expectations, about performances, about pleasing teachers, critics, audiences. But Cassie played for no one. She played for herself. And somehow that simplicity was healing something within him that not even the best therapists had managed to reach. William observed from a distance, always from a distance, because he knew his presence would alter the dynamic. He watched his son take a deep breath before placing his hands on the keys, saw his shoulders gradually relax, saw the phantom of panic receding an inch each day. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. By the third week, Ethan played a complete piece. It was a simple Chopin nocturne, one he had known since childhood. His hands trembled at first, but Cassie was there, playing softly beside him, steadying the rhythm, and the tremor subsided. When the last note faded into the air, Ethan stood still, looking at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. Then, for the first time since his collapse, he smiled. William saw that smile from the hallway and felt his eyes sting. He had made the right decision. No matter what Brooke and Victoria said, no matter how many contracts were lost, that smile was worth everything. But there was something more William needed to do. Something risky, perhaps unwise, but necessary. He needed to create an anchor, a public commitment that would force Ethan to move forward, even when fear returned. He needed a promise that couldn't be easily undone. And so it was that 3 days before the concert, William descended to the ballroom at the exact moment Cassie and Ethan finished their rehearsal. "May I speak with both of you?" he asked, and there was something different in his voice, a solemnity that made both of them turn immediately. Cassie rose, nervous. Ethan remained seated, but attentive. William walked to the piano, looked at his son, then at Cassie, and spoke the words that would change everything. "Cassie, if you play this piano at the concert, you will marry my son." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan's eyes widened. Cassie stood motionless, the blood draining from her face. William continued, his voice steady. "This is not a whim. It is a promise. Before witnesses, before my mother's piano, I am telling you that if you play at the concert and help my son return, you will have my word that this family will welcome you as one of its own. And Ethan," he looked at his son, "you deserve someone who sees the person you are, not the pianist you were meant to be." Cassie felt the world spin. Marry? Ethan? She barely knew the man. They'd exchanged a few words, shared some music, but nothing to justify this. It was madness. She yearned to refuse, but the word caught in her throat when her eyes met Ethan's. He looked as lost as she did, yet there was something more there, a silent question. "Are you leaving now?" "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling," Cassie began, her voice trembling, "this makes no sense. I'm an employee. I clean ballrooms. You play piano," William interrupted softly. "You brought my son back to music. You are the only person in this entire city who has managed to do that. If that holds no value, then nothing does." Cassie looked at the floor, her hands trembling. $30,000 was already more than she could comprehend. But to marry the hotel owner's son? To enter a family from another world, with its different codes and expectations? "I need to think," she said, and exited the ballroom before anyone could see her tears. Ethan was left alone with his father. "You've lost your mind," he said, and there was no anger in his voice, only confusion. "You can't promise her life away, or mine." "I'm not promising anything you two don't decide to accept," William replied. "I'm creating an anchor, something that makes sense, something that isn't about contracts or agencies or money, something that's about real people making real choices. And what if she refuses? Then she refuses, and we move on. But if she accepts, William paused, if she accepts, you'll have someone by your side who isn't here for your last name or your career. Someone who is here because your music connects. Ethan didn't know what to say. Part of him found the idea absurd, medieval, controlling. But another part, a small and frightened part he didn't want to admit existed, wondered, what if it works? Cassie spent the night awake. Their apartment in Bridgeport was too small to hide anything. So she feigned a headache, locking herself in her room. Leo knocked on the door around 11, concerned. "Sis, are you okay?" "I am," she lied, "just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was terrified. Because William had touched a nerve, revealing her unspoken truth. She liked playing with Ethan. She liked the comfortable silence between them, the way he listened, how their music effortlessly intertwined. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that could deepen if she allowed it. But she thought of her brother. She thought of her mother. She thought of the life she knew, simple and difficult, yet her own. If she accepted this, married Ethan for his father's crazy promise, what would she become? A trophy wife? A promoted employee? An imposter in a world that wasn't hers? Or perhaps, simply a woman who had stumbled upon an unexpected path to a different life? The following morning, Cassie returned to the Sterling Grand with her answer. She found William in his executive office and stated forthrightly, "I accept, but with conditions." William leaned forward, attentive. "Name them." "I will play at the concert. I will do everything I can to help Ethan. If it works, if he manages to play, then we can discuss the rest. But it's not automatic. It's not a transaction. Marriage isn't bought with money or promises. It's built. So I will need time after the concert to truly get to know your son, to see if this makes sense for both of us. And if it doesn't, if in the end it doesn't work out, you will respect that." William remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough. And the bonus? Deposit it when Leo receives his acceptance letter from IIT, not before. I don't want to feel as though I've been bought." "Agreed." They shook hands again, and this time the agreement was different. It wasn't about control or manipulation. It was about two people attempting to protect someone they loved, each in their own way, and believing that together they might achieve more than they could alone. The week of the concert arrived with the heavy expectation of a storm about to break. The grand ballroom was prepared with obsessive attention to detail. William hired only the essentials: a discreet sound technician, tables adorned with simple arrangements of white roses, comfortable chairs arranged in a semicircle around the stage. No aggressive spotlights, no overly elevated stage. The Steinway piano was tuned by an expert who traveled from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a 70-year-old gentleman who reverently touched each key before declaring the instrument perfect. The guest list was short and strategic. A few local business associates with long-standing ties to the Sterling family, 2 music teachers who had taught Ethan in his childhood, hotel staff whom William considered loyal, and Brooke and Victoria Caldwell, of course. They had to be there, not just because they were his fiancée and future mother-in-law, but because William needed them to see with their own eyes that another path was possible for Ethan. Brooke arrived on the night of the event, dressed in black, elegant and sharp. Victoria walked beside her, on her phone, speaking quietly with someone who clearly didn't believe the concert was a good idea. They settled into the front row, crossed their legs in synchronicity, and waited with expressions that plainly stated, "We are here to watch you fail." Backstage, Cassie's hands trembled as she arranged the sheet music. She had carefully chosen 3 pieces to open the evening: a lively jazz standard, a soulful folk waltz, and a lullaby she played by ear, without sheet music, based on a melody her own mother used to sing. Her strategy was simple. Begin with something light, familiar, accessible. Cultivate an atmosphere of safety. And then, when Ethan felt ready, yield the stage to him. But something was amiss. Cassie realized it as she opened the piano bench to check the scores one last time. The papers were not hers. They were complex arrangements, filled with impossible leaps, abrupt key changes, technical indications she wouldn't be able to execute even with months of practice. Someone had swapped the sheet music. Cassie's heart pounded. She glanced around, searching for William, but he was in the reception area greeting guests. Ethan was in the adjacent dressing room, doing the breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. There was no time to warn anyone, no time to fix it. Brooke, it had to have been Brooke, or someone working for her. Cassie swallowed hard, panic rising in her throat like cold water. If she walked onto the stage and couldn't play those scores, if she failed publicly, Ethan would be exposed, vulnerable, and the entire plan would collapse. Worse, William would have been right to trust her, and she would have disappointed him. But then, deep within the bench, nestled among old papers and a forgotten pick case, Cassie found something unexpected. A small, worn leather-bound journal with Eleanor Sterling etched in faded gold letters. Eleanor, Ethan's mother. Cassie opened the journal with trembling fingers and found handwritten sheet music, notes in the margins, and, fastened with a rusty paperclip, an old cassette tape labeled simply Nana. Cassie knew that word, Nana, lullaby, and suddenly something clicked into memory. She had heard that music before. A long time ago, when her mother worked as a temporary cook at the Sterling home, before Ethan was born, before the hotel grew, Cassie's mother would sometimes bring her along, and Cassie, a child, would sit in the service area, listening to a simple, repetitive melody playing on a recorder, while Mrs. Eleanor rocked someone in a distant room. Cassie closed her eyes and let the melody return. 3 musical phrases, a closed cycle, a rocking rhythm. She knew how to play it. She didn't need swapped sheet music, didn't need virtuosity. She only needed memory and courage. The ballroom lights dimmed. It was time. The hall fell silent as Cassie entered and walked toward the piano. She felt the weight of every gaze, especially Brooke's, sharp as a blade. William was in the last row, hands clasped in his lap, his expression tense. Ethan was still backstage, awaiting their agreed-upon signal to enter. Cassie sat at the piano and took a deep breath. Her hands found the keys. Instead of opening the swapped sheet music, still resting on the stand, she simply began to play from memory. The lullaby emerged slowly, almost shyly, yet firm. It was an unpretentious melody, meant to soothe, not to impress. And it worked. The silence in the ballroom shifted, from tense anticipation to a gentle, welcoming attentiveness. William recognized the music instantly. This was the lullaby Eleanor used to play for baby Ethan, recorded on a cassette tape because she no longer trusted her own memory after her diagnosis. It was the last thing she had recorded before her passing, and William could never hear it without feeling an old wound tear open in his chest. But now, hearing it through Cassie's fingers, the pain was different. It was a sorrow mingled with tenderness, with gratitude, with something that felt like a promise of healing. Backstage, Ethan heard the melody and froze. He knew that music. He knew it intimately. It was the music that cradled his nightmares, that returned during his anxiety attacks, always a ghostly presence in the back of his mind. But for the first time, instead of fear, he felt longing. He felt his mother's embrace, the security of his childhood, when the world hadn't yet demanded anything from him. He entered the ballroom slowly, unnoticed by most, positioning himself behind the stage where he could see Cassie in profile. She didn't see him, too engrossed in the music, but continued playing as if she knew he was there. And then she did something unexpected. She modulated the lullaby into the key of a coro they had rehearsed together in the mornings, creating a natural bridge between the two themes. Ethan understood the invitation. This was his chance. There was no pressure, no hostile audience, no critical judgment. There was only a woman playing his mother's music as if it were the most natural thing in the world, offering space for him to join when he was ready. He walked onto the stage. The audience noticed, and a murmur began, but Cassie held the rhythm, unperturbed. Ethan sat beside her, their legs almost touching, and for a moment he just listened. His hands sweated. The familiar tremor began in his fingers. But then he looked at Cassie, and she looked back, and in her eyes there was no judgment or expectation, only presence. Ethan placed his left hand on the keys and began to play the bass line of the coro, maintaining the pulse as Cassie had taught him. His right hand took longer, but eventually followed, arpeggiating simple chords he knew by heart. It wasn't brilliant. It wasn't virtuosic. But it was honest. It was real music, shared, built in real time between two people who trusted each other. A collective breath filled the grand ballroom. William felt tears tracing paths down his face, and he made no move to wipe them away. Brooke glanced at Victoria, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered in both their expressions. This shouldn't be working. It shouldn't be this simple. Yet it was, precisely because of its simplicity. Ethan and Cassie played the folk melody until its conclusion, and when the last note faded into the air, they remained motionless for a long moment. Then Ethan rose, turned to the audience, and said in a clear voice, "I want to play one more, a piece my mother loved." He returned to the piano, this time alone, and began a short, sweet Bach prelude Eleanor used to play on Sunday afternoons. There was no applause until the very end, and when it came, it was discreet, respectful, deeply moved. William descended from his place and walked to the stage, ascending the steps unhurriedly. He stood between his son and Cassie and addressed the audience. "My son has found his way back, and he does not return alone." Brooke attempted to control the damage immediately. As soon as the lights brightened and guests began to circulate through the ballroom, she intercepted William, with Victoria by her side. "We need to talk. Now." William guided them to a discreet corner, away from the servers offering champagne and the guests genuinely embracing Ethan. "Did you see what happened here?" William began before Victoria could speak. "My son played. He truly played. Without collapse, without fear, without trauma. And do you know why? Because there was no pressure. Because no one was demanding anything from him beyond what he could give." "It was an amateur performance," Victoria retorted, her voice low but sharp. "A domestic presentation. That doesn't prove he's ready to return to the professional circuit. It proves he needs scaffolding, constant support. And if he needs support, he needs the agency. He needs a professional structure, not an employee who plays by ear." "That employee," William said with dangerous calm, "has done more for my son in 1 month than your agency has in 6. And any contract demanding high-pressure performances or transferring control of his name to third parties is canceled. I will not permit it anymore." Brooke stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "You cannot do that. We have pre-contracts signed. We have sponsors waiting. You will expose us. You will expose Ethan. You will— Will what? William interrupted. Sue? For protecting my son from you? Do whatever you wish. But Ethan signs nothing further without his express approval, in a healthy state, with complete autonomy. And I have documents prepared to prove it. He pulled a folded envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. Protective clauses drafted by a specialized attorney. Any attempt to force Ethan to fulfill commitments against his will be legally challenged. Victoria looked at the envelope as if it were a viper. You're ending the engagement, she stated, not asked. That's for Ethan to decide, William replied. But if I were Brooke, I'd start thinking about what she truly wants, a husband or a financial asset. Brooke went pale. She glanced at Ethan, who was across the ballroom, conversing with one of his old professors, Cassie beside him. The scene was intimate, natural, and for the first time, Brooke understood that she had lost. Not dramatically, not through betrayal or scandal. She had lost because Ethan had never truly belonged to her. He had always belonged to the piano, to music, to something she could never truly understand or control. We're leaving, Victoria said, her voice chilling. But this isn't over, William. You'll see you were wrong. When reality hits and Ethan realizes he needs professional management, you'll regret burning bridges. They left without a farewell. William watched them go and felt only relief. Across the ballroom, Ethan had also seen Brooke leave. He waited a few minutes, politely said goodbye to the professor, and followed her. He caught up to her in the parking lot, where Victoria was already getting into the car, and Brooke hesitated with her hand on the door handle. Brooke, he called. She turned, her eyes red but tearless. I'm so sorry. Why? She asked, her voice tired. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who is. She paused, searching for words. I'm the one who confused things. I thought helping you professionally was loving you. But love isn't control, is it? It's not a contract. Ethan softly agreed. It isn't. You like her, Brooke said, and it wasn't an accusation, but a simple recognition. Cassie. Ethan thought for a moment. I trust her, and that's more than I've felt for anyone in a very long time. Brooke nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. Then take care of her, and let her take care of you. She got into the car without another word. Ethan stood in the parking lot until the car's taillights disappeared down Michigan Avenue. Then he returned to the ballroom, where Cassie was waiting, and knew that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't an end, it was a beginning. The days that followed the concert were strange and full of practical decisions. William fulfilled his promise and deposited the bonus into Cassie's account as soon as Leo received his enrollment confirmation for IIT. $30,000 that meant an entire year of peace to study without needing to work late nights at a diner or weekends at a grocery store. Cassie wept when she saw the receipt, not from mere relief, but from something more complex. The feeling that one part of life was closing and another, vast and daunting, was opening before her. William no longer mentioned the marriage. Not directly, at least, but his demeanor shifted. Cassie continued working at the hotel, yet now she had access to areas previously reserved only for guests and managers. She could use the piano whenever she wished, not just in the mornings, but at any hour. William began inviting her to meetings about upcoming events, asking for her opinion on musical repertoire, on ambiance, on details she hadn't known she understood until she was asked to voice her thoughts. I'm preparing you, he stated one afternoon, without pretense, to be more than an employee, to be a partner, if you wish. Cassie gazed at him for a long moment. What if I don't wish to? What if I decide it's not for me? Then you remain an employee for as long as you desire, at double your salary, and no one here treats you any differently. But I need to give you the option, Cassie, because my son needs someone like you, and you deserve the chance to choose a life different from the one that was imposed upon you. The conversation hung, unresolved, but the seed had been sown. Ethan and Cassie began meeting outside the hotel. They visited the Art Institute of Chicago one Saturday afternoon, strolled through Grant Park, window shopping, and had coffee at a bakery in Wicker Park where no one knew them. It wasn't dating, not yet, but it was closeness. It was mutual discovery. Ethan spoke of his childhood, of his mother, of the burden of growing up as the piano prodigy. Cassie spoke of Bridgecourt, of the nights she slept hungry so her siblings could eat, of music as her sole escape. "Did you never wish to return to studying music?" Ethan asked as they shared pastries on a park bench. "I do," Cassie admitted, "but there's always something more urgent. Always a bill to pay, always someone needing more than I do." What if there wasn't? Cassie fell silent, because the truth was, she had never allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to choose between her own dreams and her family's survival. It was uncharted, frightening territory. 3 weeks after the concert, Ethan returned to playing. Not in public, but at home, in the small apartment William maintained annexed to the hotel. It was a smaller piano, an upright Yamaha that had belonged to his grandfather. Ethan played for hours, testing the boundaries of his block, discovering that it still existed but had shrunk. It hadn't vanished, but it had become something manageable. He called Cassie to listen. She came, climbing the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was under maintenance, and found Ethan playing a piece she recognized, the same jazz standard they had played together at the concert. But now he played alone, and he played beautifully. He played with confidence. "You don't need me anymore," Cassie said, and there was a sadness in her voice she hadn't expected to feel. "I need you," Ethan replied, pausing his playing. "But not as a crutch. I need you as a partner, as someone who understands." He rose from the bench, walked over to her, and said softly, "I want to truly know you. I want to understand where this music you play comes from. I want to know what makes you smile, what frightens you, what makes you wake up in the morning beyond obligation. And if, at the end of all this, you find we don't fit, that I'm just a privileged guy who understands nothing of your life, I'll accept it. But please, give me this chance." Cassie looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. It wasn't an overwhelming passion. It wasn't a fairy tale promise. It was merely a wounded young man asking to know a woman who had helped him heal. And that, in some profound way, felt more real than any dramatic declaration could ever be. "All right," she said, "let's try." To try meant months of conversations, of simple dinners, of afternoons spent playing piano together, not out of duty, but out of sheer joy. It meant Ethan visiting their apartment in Bridgeport and meeting Leo Miller, who initially greeted him with suspicion, but was gradually won over when Ethan showed genuine interest in his programming projects. It meant Cassie meeting Ethan's extended family, aunts and cousins who regarded her with thinly veiled curiosity, but eventually accepted that she was not there to take advantage of anyone. It also meant Cassie returning to her studies. William Sterling covered her enrollment for an evening piano program at the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University, a partial scholarship Cassie accepted only due to her proven merit. Dividing her days between working at the Sterling Grand in the mornings and classes at night, she returned home exhausted, but filled with a happiness she hadn't remembered feeling before. Leo Miller prospered at the Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT, He finished his first semester with excellent grades and a guaranteed internship at a tech startup in the Fulton Market district. He began earning enough to help with the household bills, and for the first time in years, Cassie's mother was able to reduce her hours of domestic work and focus on her own health. William Sterling observed everything from a distance, content. He hadn't orchestrated lives. He hadn't purchased people. He had merely opened doors and allowed each individual to choose whether to step through them. And they had all chosen to step through. The marriage proposal came almost a year after the concert. It wasn't at the hotel. It wasn't in public. It was on an ordinary afternoon after one of Cassie's classes at the conservatory, when Ethan picked her up and they walked together to Promontory Point in Hyde Park to watch the sunset. The city stretched below them, noisy and chaotic, and Ethan said, "Do you remember my father's promise?" "I remember," Cassie replied, leaning against the railing. "He was right. Perhaps not in the way, but in the essence. You changed my life. Not just by bringing me back to the piano, but by showing me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. And I want to spend the rest of my life being true with you." He had no ring. He didn't kneel. He just looked at her and asked, "Marry me?" Cassie thought of everything that had happened. She thought of the girl who played piano in secret, of the woman who carried her family's weight on her shoulders, of the musician who was being reborn. She thought of the fragile young man she had met and the strong man he was becoming. And she realized that the answer wasn't about gratitude or convenience. It was about choice. "Yes," she said, "but only if you promise one thing." "What?" "That we keep playing together. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, we always come back to the piano. I promise." They married 3 months later in a simple civil ceremony at the Cook County Clerk's office with only their families present. Leo was Cassie's witness. Ethan's cousin was his witness. Cassie's mother cried from start to finish, but they were good tears. William spoke briefly, saying only, "Welcome to the family," officially. Brooke sent a gift, a collection of antique sheet music with a note that read, "May you make beautiful music together." It was a dignified farewell, an acknowledgement that she had lost the battle but held no grudge. Victoria sent nothing, but William didn't expect her to. Ethan's official return to the stage happened 6 months after the wedding on a carefully chosen date. It was winter, specifically July, a full year since the day Cassie had played in secret and Ethan had first heard. The chosen theater was the Auditorium Theater, Chicago, not the Symphony Center where the original trauma had occurred, but a space that signified a new beginning. The concert program was built by Ethan and Cassie together. It began with the lullaby, now formally arranged as a trio with cello and violin. It continued with the folk melody they had played at the hotel concert, then with Ethan's solo pieces, a Chopin piece, and ended with an original composition by Ethan, for 4 hands, which he dedicated to Cassie. The audience was not small. There were critics, there were former teachers, there were curious onlookers who wanted to see if the prodigy had truly recovered. But Ethan didn't play for them. He played for the mother who was no longer there, for the father who had protected him in his own convoluted way, and for the woman sitting beside him on the piano bench, ready to share every note. The concert ran without incident. There was a moment, in the middle of the Chopin piece, when Ethan's hands trembled, but he took a deep breath, looked at Cassie in the front row, and the tremor passed. The music continued. The critics the next day were mixed. Some said he'd lost his brilliance, no longer the prodigy he once was. Others said he'd gained maturity, now playing with true emotion instead of mere technique. Ethan read the reviews once, never returning. In the end, his own opinion mattered most. He resumed playing regularly, on his own terms, monthly recitals at the Sterling Grand Hotel, benefit concerts, collaborations with local musicians, no international tours, no suffocating schedule. He was a musician, not a celebrity, at peace with that. Cassie continued playing too. She graduated from the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University 3 years later with honors, and began teaching piano to Bridgeport children in a community program William helped finance. She didn't abandon her hotel work, but now coordinated musical events, selecting repertoires, hiring musicians, crafting experiences. It united all her skills. She excelled. Leo graduated in computer engineering and founded a tech education startup that flourished. He never forgot his sister's sacrifices. When the company profited, he first bought their mother a better house, away from Bridgeport, with an extra room that became Cassie's office. William continued managing the hotel, but with less obsession. He discovered he could delegate, could trust, and he found that being a grandfather, when Cassie and Ethan had their first child 3 years after the wedding, surpassed any business success. The child, a girl, was named Eleanor. She grew up hearing piano before speaking, and by 4, insisted on climbing onto the bench to play alongside her parents. No one forced or pressured her. She played because she wanted to, because she was happy. And every morning, before breakfast, Cassie and Ethan would sit together at the piano, in the Sterling Grand Hotel's Grand Ballroom, now open to the public in early hours, and play. Sometimes it was just a quick folk melody, sometimes a complete sonata. It didn't matter. What mattered was the ritual, the connection, the remembrance of where they had begun. William's promise, made that July day a year prior, wasn't whim nor control. It was a desperate father trying to save his son the only way he knew. And it worked, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because there was risk, choice, and real people doing their best with what they had. Cassie never regretted agreeing to play that piano. She never regretted trusting the man who made an absurd promise and fulfilled it in a way that truly made sense. And Ethan never regretted letting a woman he barely knew guide him back to the only thing that genuinely mattered: making music, not to prove anything to anyone, but to remember that simply being alive was reason enough to sing. The end.